Morning, I would like for us to consider a couple of lessons we can learn from the life of Joseph. He is one of my favorite Bible characters, Bible people, because we don't have a whole lot of detail about his life. The things we do have information about, they reflect for us a type of character that a person that follows God's will has, that we want to try to emulate even for ourselves today. When we look at the life of Joseph, we see that his life ultimately was a life that was really full of suffering, which is an interesting concept, that someone going through so much difficulty in his own personal life can use those circumstances to be shaped into the kind of character to fulfill God's purposes, kind of working behind the scenes. And so what I'd like to do is go through the entirety of the text we have about Joseph. We have about 6 chapters in their entirety in the book of Genesis. We're going to go through verse by verse systematically and talk about the details of the Hebrew syntax behind each of these lines. And then when we're done, after about a year and a half, we'll be able to make some applications, some lessons for ourselves. No, I would like to do that, but we have 25 minutes in front of us. And so what I'd like to do is just kind of briefly talk about 3 main movements of his life, and then a final movement, making it a total of 4, and make some application as we go along the way, talking about these main issues and events in his life, and make some application from them. Let's begin our conversation going to the book of Genesis, chapter 37. Let's talk about the idea of how Joseph was able to persevere with his faith in God even through betrayal. Now, I know no betrayal has ever happened to you in your personal or professional life whatsoever. So let's think outside the box for a minute and imagine that you had someone in the world who didn't want the best thing for you, okay? Sure. Let's talk about these passages. Genesis 37, beginning in verse 18. Now, for a little bit of context, I like to go into a deeper context, but a little bit of context in case you are not familiar with this story. We've got Joseph, who is the youngest son of Jacob, later known as Israel. And you've got Joseph being an individual who is a young boy. He had a dream, and from that dream, he interpreted the dream to be a vision from God. And he saw that they were represented, the members of his family, as stacks of wheat. And they were all bowing down before his stack of wheat. An idea that he would be, as the youngest and most loved child of the family, that his older brothers would bow down to him. Now, being a young boy and telling your brothers that you think you've had a vision from God, that all the older brothers are going to bow down to how great you are, is maybe not the wisest dream to share with brothers that don't like you that much to begin with, right? And so, the youngest brother, Joseph, goes out to check on his older brothers. We find this being the first passage, verse 18. They, the brothers, saw him, Joseph, from afar. And before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. So sharing the dream wasn't the best plan, right? They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, one of the great big holes in the ground. Then they will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." When Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let's not take his life." Reuben said to him, "Shed no blood. Throw him into the pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father." Verse 23, so when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the Technicolor robe, if you might remember from back in the day, right? The robe of many colors that he wore. Verse 24, they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty, there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat. They worked up an appetite trying to throw their brother into the pit of death, so they had a picnic, right? Of course, as you do. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, because he's our brother after all." Don't forget about that. Trying to kill him and throw him into a pit, yeah, okay, good plan, but let's not kill him. Let's just make some money off of him, right? He's our brother, he's our own flesh. And the brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by. They drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and they sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. And so we've got this youngest son of Jacob or Israel being betrayed by his own brothers. They throw him into a pit, and while they're having a picnic, they're thinking about how they can kill him because of their own envy and their own jealousy of how much he is loved by their father, Jacob or Israel. And while they're thinking about how to kill him, they come up with a better idea. The better idea is, let's just take him out of the pit and make some money off of him. We're going to sell him as a slave going down to Israel. If you're wondering, down to Egypt rather, if you're wondering how in the book of Exodus all the Hebrews find themselves enslaved in the land of Egypt, it begins with this story right here. That would not be the case if this event did not take place. But we'll see that the hand of God here, the will of God, is being weaved through this story. Because if Joseph was not sold by his own brothers into slavery, into Egypt, then when a great famine happens in the future, Joseph would not be there to be providing for not only all the Egyptians and those that came to Egypt to get food, but even his own family members would not be fed. They would be starved if they did not enact this great envious betrayal. Now, in our story, a couple of things to kind of keep in mind as we go through these main movements. An application that we can pull from this story, here's one suggestion for you. When friends or family wound us, when they betray us, when they hurt us, God is still able to weave that story for good. Now, there are certain events in my life that I wish never happened to me. Maybe you have the same. Things that if you could go back and reverse the outcomes of certain events or movements in your own life, you would do in a heartbeat. But one way to look at those movements, those events in your life, is that those events shaped you into the kind of person God needed you to be for this moment in front of you.
That's right.
We learn a lot from the things that happen to us, even the things that we wish never would have happened to us. And in this story, that's one of the great lessons. The brothers betrayed Joseph. They sold him as a slave to Egypt, but God utilized that betrayal for good.
That's right.
In verse, moving on to chapter 29, here we go, 39. Not only was Joseph able to persevere through his own betrayal by his brothers, he was able to persevere in his integrity. And if there is really any story that leaps out to me, being a man in this world, it's this one right here. Going to Genesis 39, beginning in verse 6. Joseph has been betrayed by his brothers. He's now being sold as a slave over a household in Egypt. He is sold to a man named Potiphar, and Potiphar is a great man of wealth. In verse 6, So he's left all that he had, Potiphar, in Joseph's charge. And because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. So we find that Joseph not only is a slave for a man named Potiphar, he's in charge of his entire household. God has blessed him and overseen his ways, and the household of Potiphar has been prospered because of God's blessing upon Joseph. Now, he's making the best out of a terrible situation, isn't he? He finds himself as a slave, sold by his own brothers, but while he is here, making his way through his life, finding himself as a slave when he was a beloved son from his own family members, he's doing the best he can in the situation in which he finds himself. And sometimes, folks, just as a reminder for me and for you, we can't really, of our own volition, of our own will, determine where we're going to be in the future. I mean, we can have some influence, some control, some direction, some prayerful discerning about what to do when we come to a crossroads, but ultimately, we are where God puts us. And while we're there, we might as well make the best out of our situation in which we find ourselves. It could be a blessed position that God is using us in that location to be a blessing to others, but in other instances, we can just do what God wants us to do no matter where we are. And Joseph's doing that right here. He's a slave, not where he wants to be. To Potiphar, not where he wants to be. In Egypt, definitely not where he wants to be. But while he's there, he's going to do the best that he can in this situation. And because of that, God blessed him. And it just so happens that he was a good-looking guy. Who would have thought? Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Verse 7. And after a time, his master, Potiphar's wife, cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." This is not for an afternoon nap, folks. This is no siesta you've ever thought about. This is what it looks like on the surface. Verse 8. But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house. He has put everything that he has under my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. In case you forgot, Potiphar's wife, we're not married. You belong to somebody else. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" Now, according to the text of Genesis, around the story, the narrative around Joseph, this is the first mention of what God's relationship was to Joseph and Joseph's relationship was to God. God has not been brought up in the story of Joseph yet until this moment right here. Now, he is in Egypt. And not everything in Egypt stays in Egypt. It's not Vegas, right? He says, I am not where I want to be. I'm not doing the things that I want to do. I'm going to work for my master while I'm here. But I'm not going to forget my dynamic, my relationship with my God while I'm here. That's right. He easily could have said, you know what? Here I am. I find myself in Egypt. I'm making the most out of a bad situation. And if I have some female companionship while I'm here, when I get back home, I'll change my ways. He didn't do that. He's in Egypt as a slave. His master's wife is saying, "Lie with me." And he says, I can't do that for two reasons. The first is, I know my status and my role. Your husband, my master, has put me in this position for him to be blessed and for me to do my best under his charge. And secondly, most importantly, this violates my covenant relationship with my God. I'm not doing that. Right. you're somebody else's wife. I've got to be careful now. Folks, gentlemen, I do not want to counsel any more husbands in the church who fail because of this proposition. I don't want to. I never thought I would, to be honest with you. I was that naive at one point. I have seen some of the strongest Christian families I have ever worked alongside implode because of unfaithfulness. This is in the book of Genesis, the beginning book, the first book of our Bibles. Chapter 39, you've got a man who's in a dynamic religious relationship with his Creator, and because of those dynamics, he will not succumb to temptation of a physical nature. And we've got folks in the church that are faced with the exact same situation that fail. Now, I know we're all human, but if you want to see a church fall apart, a Christian family fall apart, this, in my estimation, is the worst form of it. That's right. Now, we just went through from Mother's Day to Father's Day various lessons about the Christian household, and I mentioned Christian husbands, of which I am one, that we need to be the leaders and spiritually of the household. If you want to lose all authority, all respect, all trust in your family, you're looking at culprit number one right here. I've seen this destroy strong, working Christian families. So I say this gently and lovingly. Joseph taught us a great lesson right here. Now, I know the guys aren't always to blame. I like blaming guys because I am one. I get to pick on myself a whole lot. But women can also succumb to this temptation. We need to be careful and learn the lessons from the Scriptures. Verse 10, and she spoke to Joseph day after day. He would not listen to her, to lie beside her or to be with her. He wouldn't go there. He was a man of character, a man of faith. He did not succumb to temptation. Now, I like the detail here in the English at the very last clause, to lie beside her or to be with her. It seems almost like she said, you know what, I know you're tired, you've been working all day. We don't have to do anything. Just lay right here. Just take a load off. He goes, no thanks, and just kept on moving, right? Verse 11, but one day, as it happens, there was one day, he went inside the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house. If you wonder why, if you ask to meet with me, and you are not a man, and I say, I'd love to meet with you, Melissa will be right next to me, or Faye is right here, folks, you've got to be careful. Guard yourself against situations that even look dangerous. Verse 12, she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. He left his garment in her hand, fled, and got out of the house. Now, what did he do wrong here? Absolutely nothing. He didn't do a thing wrong. However, verse 13, as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, see, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to me to lie with me. I cried out with a loud voice, and as soon as he had heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house. Is that true? Not a single word of that is true. But, verse 16, then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home. She told him the same story, saying, the Hebrew servant whom you brought among us came in to me to laugh at me. As soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house. As soon as Potiphar, his master, heard the words his wife spoke to him, this is the way your servant treated me, his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him, put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. He was put in jail. For just cause? No, not at all. He was in a bad situation, a slave to Potiphar, an Egyptian household. And now he's even in a worse situation. But wouldn't you know, God has a little bit of sense of humor and a little bit of irony going on. He's taking him from a bad place to a worse place, and he is still weaving his plans through these situations. One lesson we can pull from this, if I've not made it clear enough, folks, we need to stand firm in God's strength when tempted to compromise. There is all kinds of rationalizations that we can have in our minds about why we think doing a sinful thing might be okay just this one time. It's not. It's not. I told you I don't want to counsel any more Christian men because of their families have exploded because of their indiscretions. And why I mean that. So if you come to me and you say, I need to talk to you for a minute, my family's falling apart, I'm going to say, didn't you hear when I said I don't want to talk to you about that anymore? If all it takes is for me to say, folks, listen, here's a lesson for us all to learn. Let's apply it to our actual lives. I'm warning all of us. Don't succumb to temptation. Stand firm. I know you're human. You'll make mistakes. I'm human. I've made 1,000 mistakes today, so I get it. At the same time, how many times do we have to learn the same lesson over and over and over again before we actually utilize that lesson and change our lives? Repent of our old ways and do what God wants. Okay? Fair enough? Made my point? If you don't get it now, I don't know what I can say. Okay? Here we go. I'll tattoo, stop it, right here on my forehead, if that would help you. Not only that, I had 6 points. I kind of trimmed it down a little bit. He was able to persevere even through delay. Now, I wish I could go through this whole story because I find it to be the funniest story I've ever heard in my life. In Scripture, you've got Joseph. Remember, he has the dreams, right? God gave him the ability to interpret those dreams as well. He's in prison, and he finds himself essentially in charge of the prison, as he does. He was a slave of a household. He did such a great job that God blessed him. He was in charge of the household. They threw him in jail. God blessed him. Guess what? He's a prisoner in charge of the jail. Do what you can where you find yourself, I guess, right? So here we have the story where they're in jail. He's in jail, in charge of the prison for the prisoners. He's still a prisoner, by the way, but he's in a good position. 2 of the royal court officials come to jail, as they probably often did, upsetting the Pharaoh. One has a dream. He goes, I wish I could just figure out what this dream's about. And wouldn't you know it, the guy in charge of the jail says, I can interpret dreams. God gives me the revelation. Your dream simply means, hey, 3 days from now, you are going to be put back into your royal position. Don't worry about it. And then you got a baker who's there with him as well. I had the same similar kind of dream. And you gave him a good revelation for what that dream is. What about me? And his says, well, your dream means that you're going to be hung by the neck until dead in 3 days. Sorry about that. So the royal cupbearer is put back in his position. The baker, he didn't make it. Who would have thought? And you got the royal cupbearer going out of prison, being told on his way out of the prison, hey, don't forget about me, Joseph, who's here for no wrongdoing of my own. He goes back to his job. He forgot about Joseph in prison. He is there, and he is waiting, and 2 years go by of him being in this jail for no wrongdoing on his part. It took a while for the cupbearer to remember, oh yeah, I knew I was forgetting something. This guy who helped me out when I was in prison shouldn't be there. And wouldn't you know that Pharaoh had a dream that he can't interpret? I know a guy. I left him back in prison 2 years ago. Let's pull him out and see if he can interpret Pharaoh's dream. And guess what he does? That's Joseph for you. One lesson we can pull from that whole story, the whole narrative, is that we have been given gifts by God. Now, it may not be as cool as hearing a dream and interpreting that dream for God's glory and benefit. That's a pretty cool gift, right? If I could do that, I'd show off all the time. I would. That's why I don't have that gift, by the way, is that I'd be using it for my own. Like, want to hear a cool story? I heard a dream last night. No, they're all terrible stories, by the way. But we all have these gifts. We have things that God has blessed us with to be able to do while we're here, to bless others while we're here, to glorify Him while we're here. So in the situation in which we find ourselves, we can use those gifts, those talents, those blessings from God to benefit Him and others. But sometimes it takes a little while. It's not immediate. Do not abandon our calling just because our breakthrough isn't immediate. In Psalm 27, verse 14, the psalmist writes these words for us. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. That's right. I said before, a couple of weeks ago, maybe last week, it all blends together after a while. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Sometimes it takes some time to work together for God's purpose. He persevered even though he was betrayed. He persevered while having integrity with his God. He persevered even through being patient and God delaying the process of him being blessed. And then I guess finally, there's a whole slew of lessons we could pull from Joseph, but here are just 5 or 4. Persevering and how we forgive. We're going to fast forward. Joseph is now second in charge of Egypt. He laid by in store the crops that they needed for 7 years. They had 7 good years, 7 famine years. They stockpiled during the good 7 years. The famine hit, and everyone was starving to death, except for the folks in Egypt, because God utilized Joseph while he was there. Long story short, you've got his family, his brothers, who originally sold him as a slave in Egypt, coming to him, who's now essentially in charge of Egypt, asking for food. Now, he messes with them as any good younger brother would. He thinks that they're going to be executed, that they stole some stuff, all kinds of fun shenanigans go on back and forth. But he eventually reveals himself, and he determines to them, hey, listen, all the things that you did against me have actually been for the glory of God, and they saved your life. How funny is that? And he was willing and able to forgive them fully for their betrayal and their jealousy. That's right. What a man. If I were in charge of Egypt and the brothers who threw me in a pit to kill me showed up at my front doorstep, oh boy. You have any grain? Oh, I got some stuff for you. Come on back here. No. He forgave them. He fed them, took care of them. He loved them, despite of their jealousy towards him. But Dad died. Eventually, Jacob, Israel died. And the brothers were terrified because they thought, wouldn't you? Well, the only thing keeping him from killing us was Dad was still around. Dad's not here anymore. Genesis 50, in verse 15, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil we did to him." I'd think the same thing, wouldn't you? So they sent a message to Joseph. They wouldn't even talk to him first. Like, here's a messenger saying, "Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father." And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. You think so little of me, he's thinking? His brothers came down, fell down before him, and said, "Behold, we are your servants. We're your slaves now." Joseph said, "Do not fear, because am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones." I love that. I'll take care of you guys. I know we had our differences. Tried to kill me or whatever. It's all good. Here we are. God's brought us back together. Thus, he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. One among many lessons from that story is this: we need to be able to release past hurts. Sometimes it takes time. Okay? That's okay. Extend grace as we have received it. God is freely able to forgive us of our debts, that we can forgive the debts people have against us. Here's some application for you, Dave. Here's your slide. Identify your pit. What betrayal or hardship are you facing? Maybe you're in the pit this morning. Commit to integrity, fellas. Pick on you one more time. How are we going to be able to stand firm this week? Has temptation seized you? Has it lied to you? Now's the time to really evaluate where we are and say, you know what? We can't do that anymore. We have people that depend on us, around us, and we have a God that loves us who said, don't do that. Stop it. Right? We need to trust God's timing. And that's really hard because we have our own timeline in our minds. Maybe it's just me, but if things happen the way I would want them, ultimately, they wouldn't be the right thing. Trusting in God's timing is hard. It requires patience. And then finally, we can practice forgiveness. The idea of forgiving those who have wronged us, loving our enemies and turning our cheeks, for example. Someone else mentioned that somewhere. Pray for someone who has wronged you. Pray for your enemy in your life. If you have a need to respond to the invitation this morning, if the story, the lessons from the life of Joseph have impacted you and there needs to be a course correction made, allow us to support you. We have shepherds at the doors waiting to hear your needs, to help guide you in this life, or we can pray for you as a family. Come forward and talk to me just for a moment while we stand and we sing.